We can train ourselves to slow down, to speak like we're looking at the sky, or to, cook. Like everything we do with so much more quality when we're in this state of just here.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, where you can find a large selection of Om and yoga clothing, spiritual jewelry, and unique fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now here's your host, Ashton Szabo.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Savannah Podcast. I am Ashton Szabo, your host. Today's show is all about thriving in the world and staying connected to spirit. Our guest today to join us in the conversation is Cara Bradley. She's the author of the book On the Verge, Wake Up, Show Up, and Shine, recently published by New World Library. She is a teacher of yoga, of meditation, and fitness. She's been a mental strength coach for over 3 decades at her Verge Yoga Center. And as well as the personal work that she does, she's also worked with teams such as Villanova University and Penn State. Really excited to have her on the show today. Cara, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here, Ashton.
Well, it's great to have you. Now, in your book, On the Verge, you talk about the word itself, the verge, and how it comes from this term in the Amazon where these two rivers, or any two rivers, meet, and there's an explosion of life, that life is able to really thrive in those areas. And what I want to hear from you is if you could tell us a little bit more about the actual verge and what it means and why it matters to us.
Great. Yeah, I love this whole idea of there being a place on the planet where wildlife and nature thrive, where research has found that there's the most diverse amount of species. It's incredible, like you said, this explosion of life. And so upon finding out about that, I started to do my own search. I wanted to know if there was a verge around me and how do I stand on the verge and where do I thrive most? And it really set me off on a life's journey of how do I reach and tap into my human potential, our human potential. So the verge, what I came up with after literally decades of inquiry, was that the verge is this moment. And that really, when it all comes down to it, when I show up right here in this moment fully, not just sort of, but fully, I thrive in whatever I'm doing. I shine.
And what initially got you interested in human performance and this idea of thriving?
Well, I had an experience when I was 19. I was a college track runner, and I was running in my last race. And what happened was I was a mediocre runner at best. And so for this last race, I did something very different than I normally did. I went off on my own before the race, and I did a slow warm-up jog. So you can picture a very rhythmic, gentle pace. And I started talking to myself and said, let's just break our personal record. Let's beat the personal best. Let's get our personal best, our new personal best. And so I started to repeat to myself, personal best. And what I didn't know at the time was that it was almost like a mantra. I was settling my mind. I was calming my nervous system. So when I stepped up to the race, to the starting line, I was in a different state than I'd ever been pre-race. And I, as the story goes, I killed it. I shaved 6 seconds off my personal best. And it was my last race. And I looked and I was like, oh my God, I had this in me my whole career. Like I had this strength. I could have been an elite runner. And so from that day forward, I studied the race and all the aspects of the race and the state that I was in when I was running. And over the course of the last few decades, I've recognized that it is really our natural state where we shine. The natural state of our being, the ground of our being, is where we show up and shine in everything that we do.
Now, one of the things that we see a lot, sort of ingrained in many spiritual traditions across the world, is this idea that poverty is a necessary part of truly living a spiritual life, whether it's material poverty or even this idea of annihilation of parts of the ego and self. So I'm curious, where does thriving in the world actually fit into this, and how does it help enhance our experience as spiritual beings?
That's a really great question. I love it because there is such fullness in life. I mean, there's emptiness, and we can talk about emptiness, but there's also, in the emptiness is this richness, this fullness, this ever present thriving, pulsing that is constantly informing us of how to continue to evolve, adapt and evolve, adapt and evolve, to continue to lean forward, to continue to lean into what's been done and to break through and create new life, right? So, this idea of getting rid of everything, and there are these spiritual practices in Buddhism. There's the neti practice, which is looking at everything and what life isn't, what the awakened state is not. It is not, being dragged down by thoughts. It's not being succumbed by emotions. It's not. So there is this yes and no constant paradox in the world, but thriving and shining, the way I put it, isn't necessarily about winning the race or winning the election, right? It is about thriving in this moment, is showing up in your fullest potential as a podcast host, as a partner, as a friend, as whatever, as a cook making dinner. So we can look at it as so many different angles.
Well, one of the things that I see kind of as a trap in our self-help culture is this tendency to sometimes get caught up in constantly striving, whether that's materially striving or spiritually. And in your book, you talk about this moment where you let go of needing to look or feel better all the time. And I was wondering if you could tell us about what brought about that shift and how important it is to find a balance between thriving in the world, but allowing the process to take place so that you're not constantly striving for something and feeling that you are less than or not enough in the moment.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's what happens and what happened to me and what happens for so many people as we journey on this road to awakening from the illusions that really hold us back from just being purely alive, is that we start to recognize all of these cultural conditions to push, force, fix, constantly want more, better. And so when I use thriving and shining, I don't necessarily mean getting, right, or being anything different than who you genuinely are in this moment. When we can show up in the moment fully, we are the best version of ourselves. We will never be any better than we are when we're present. And so I was in a yoga pose, and as a yoga teacher, I see a lot of striving and pushing and forcing, and I certainly have done my share myself. And so I've learned from watching my students and also watching myself in my practice. It's like, I was in a pose, I remember, in the back row of my yoga center, and I was in this pose called Humble Warrior, right? Humble Warrior. Meanwhile, I'm trying to push my head to the floor, in the pose. And I was just like, what the heck am I doing? Like, where am I going? And what happens if my head touches the floor? Like, is it going to be any better? Is my life going to be better? And it just, in that one fell swoop, I just saw it all. I was like, wow. The forcing is just keeping me from just being present in this, to feeling my heartbeat, to feeling my muscles pulse, to feeling, the connectiveness with the rest of the room. Like my pushing is holding me back from just living and being. And so I came up with these, my own way of reminding myself it's not about thinking, it's about being. right? It's not about thinking, it's about being. It's not about doing or achieving, it's about experiencing life. Can I experience this moment? And so that's where I was.
Well, and I think that's a pretty common thing too, especially in asana, where people interpret the asanas as a destination instead of the journey itself, where it's like, oh, something magical and spiritual will happen once I get to a certain place in a posture, instead of recognizing that the opportunity and the journey that the posture allows is the practice itself. In your book, you talk a lot about active and passive attention, and this is something that I deal a lot with my students when teaching. And I'm curious to hear how you think, like, how important is active attention in not only learning new skills but in thriving in the world, and how is that different from passive attention?
Right. So it's a great question. I don't often get asked it. So thank you. This is, these subtleties of our practice are so important. And so active and passive attention really comes down to mindfulness, right? And we all know this. And I try as best as I can to speak as widely and as simply, because that's the way I respond best as well. Like, I love to dive deep into these practices, but it's all really common sense. We already know this stuff that you and I talk about all day long, right? Everybody knows this. So active and passive attention. Passive attention, if you think about driving home from work and you're kind of sort of here and sort of not. You're driving down the road, you always go down, you're not noticing, what's going on around you. You got the news on, you're kind of listening to the news and you're thinking about dinner. Well, you're doing all this stuff, but you're really not paying attention to anything. You're kind of just moving through life on autopilot. Where active attention, it doesn't mean you're noticing the ant crossing the road, but you are actively aware. There's a brightness, an alertness, a sense of ease and peace also arises when you're actively paying attention. So what is catching my attention right now? Well, it's the yellow light, so I better slow down. And that news, it's getting a little bit loud, so I'm going to turn it down so I can focus on what's happening and the noise around me. We just become more vividly alert in the moment. So this active attention on our yoga mats is about noticing how to press your big toe down and maybe even your inner heel. Sometimes I have yoga students come to me, it's like, some of these cues are crazy. Like, who really cares where your inner heel is, right?
Yeah.
And I just explain it's a way of training our brain. We're just training our brain to be able to focus on the subtle details of what's happening in this moment, because that makes life rich.
Well, and when you're emphasizing your attention on where you're placing your foot and how you're lifting your arm, one of the things that you're not doing is thinking that same cyclical thinking that's normally filling up our head of, oh my gosh, I got this bill to pay, I got this thing to do, and it's providing that powerful anchor point for your mind. I see this a lot in my friends, myself, and my students too, with people in this idea that like, oh well, they're just good at everything that they do, and me, I'm not good at these things. And so when people are trying things that are new to them, you have certain people that tend to always thrive in what they're doing, and people are like, oh no, I'm not good at this, I suck, or whatever it may be. And when you look at the main differences, a lot of it comes down to that attention piece that, someone may have never have done that skill before, but simply because they're paying attention to what they're doing, they're more likely to thrive instead of in that passive attention where I'm kind of there, but I'm also thinking about, wow, I've never done this before and I might not be good at it. And what are people going to think of me if I fail or this, and that? It completely changes the relationship to whatever task it is we're doing in the moment, which I think it's one of the reasons why our practice can be so powerful, because it allows that training of the mind to be more active in how we pay attention. So I love that, how much that is brought into the work that you do.
Thank you.
What are some of the likely roadblocks and distractions someone might encounter when they're really actively out thriving in the world and they're living in the world and they still want to stay connected to spirit?
That's great. Well, first, what I'd like to just emphasize here is because what I don't, when I teach, what I don't want students to think is, and when I write, is that oh gosh, this is now I got to be mindful. Now it's like another thing that I have to practice every day, you know? And so instead of thinking that this is something you have to do, why not start to recognize the moments in your life when you are already present, when you are noticing? Like start to notice that this is my whole kind of switcheroo, is that we're already present and noticing all the time. And this is going to lead me into the roadblocks that you're talking about. So we are already present much of the day. We don't give ourselves enough credit. And so this is what I'm pointing to in my book and in my teaching. So why not recognize that moment when you pause and watch the sunset, or the moment you just pause before you dive into your dinner, the moment you gaze into somebody's eyes and hold the gaze for a moment, or you think about the email before you send it. You know, these are moments, we have these moments already. When we start to recognize the times when we are present, not only do they start to lengthen because we get better at paying attention, but we also start to notice when we're not. Right? So when we start to notice those moments when we do pay attention actively or pause, we start to notice the moments when we're speeding through life. Or when we meet up against these roadblocks or obstacles that hold us back from living fully, that hold us back from showing up in the moment, such as doubt, fear, restlessness, laziness, right? These are hindrances. The Buddhists call them hindrances to practice, right? There are all these habitual patterns, this conditioning, this societal conditioning that many of us we just kind of are born with some of it, and we collect some of it along the way, right? So when we start to notice when we are present, we can then start to notice, here I go again. Now I'm in doubt. This is doubt arising. I know this because it doesn't feel like I'm present. Something's blocking me. And so it's like this beautiful painting as we just analyze it. We look at it from different perspectives.
And you talk about some of our cultural conditioning as well, and our culture, and even just our modern day, not even in our culture alone, but perhaps worldwide, it feels like it's constantly speeding up and rushing forward to some goal. How important is slowing down in this process of really allowing ourselves to thrive when it seems like we're always stepping on the gas pedal? Is that the way to thrive, by always adding more and taking on more things to do, or is it about like observing so much about what you're talking about? Like, where does slowing down fit into all this? Or does it fit into that?
Oh, yeah, it certainly does. So there's this great quote, I think it was Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche said, when there's no speed, there's no struggle. When there's no speed, there's no struggle. It's when we're speeding through life that we accumulate struggle. But when there's no speed, when we're able to show up in this moment, which is the verge, right? In this moment, and maybe I need to hit send in this moment, or I need to drink some water in this moment. We slow down time. So I had this, crazy conquest this about 10 years ago. I was like, how do I slow down time? This is going so fast, And I remember reading in The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle, he said, if you want to make time slow down, just be present. And I was like, okay, wow. And it's so true, because each moment becomes full of life. I talk about it a lot, being fully alive, being lit up. So we're actually not more productive when we're moving quickly. And we can slow time down, be so much more efficient and effective, even in speaking, if we slow down. Everything we do, when we're present, we do better. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, no, I think it does, and I mean the slowing down allows for so much more. And I think I might not be getting the quote right, but it was something to the effect that if you can go slow, then you can go fast. But just because you're going fast doesn't mean you could actually go slow. Like you're inhibited, like just because you're trying to constantly race forward, it's a lot harder to actually slow it down. But sure, if you're taking the time to be present, then you develop the skill set necessary if it's appropriate to then speed up. But it doesn't really work the other way around. So I think starting from that place of presence, of just sitting in the moment, and as you said, so much more becomes available at that point because you're paying attention to what's happening now instead of trying to rush off and race after the next thing to come in front. Now, in your book, you share a lot of practices, and I think that's so important that we're not just caught up in this idea realm and up in the head and thoughts. You've got these primer practices and verge practices. I was wondering if you could talk to that a little bit, and perhaps offer our listeners two really powerful practices. Obviously, we want to encourage them to get and read your book, but what are two practices that people could do to start to incorporate in their lives to really help them thrive more?
It's great. Yeah, the primer practices are really simple, by the way. Having been a teacher for so many years, I know, and having read a lot of books like this, by the way, I know that most people are just going to kind of, oh, nice, there's another practice, just flip the page, right? So I really wanted to make sure that they were simple to do for everybody, and they're really helpful. They're just ways to interrupt your busy mind so that you can be here now. So one of my favorites, and one of the ones that a lot of readers come to me just saying, yeah, this really works, is sky gazing. So this is simple. Everybody can do it. You can do it at any time of the day, is just to pause maybe 3-5 breaths. If you can do more, and look up at the sky. And just pause. There's this expanse. When we look at the sky, there's this vastness takes over us, and it just opens our mind up from the tightness or the speed or the busyness that we get so stuck in, imprisoned in, really. So look up at the sky, night sky, morning sky, doesn't matter, even if it's through a window, and just pause for a few breaths. And it's amazing the shift that can happen, or the slowing down that you may feel. And this done over time, like you said before, we're training our brain. We can train ourselves to slow down. We can train ourselves to speak like we're looking at the sky, or to, cook. Like everything we do with so much more quality when we're in this state of just here. So I love sky gazing. And the other one one of my favorites is called Be Kind. It's actually called the Verge strategy, which is something that we do all the time. We can just constantly remind ourselves to be kind to ourselves. We live in a culture of we're really, really good at beating ourselves up, myself included. But the more we can befriend ourselves, just even by putting your hand on your heart, right? Or just giving yourself a little encouragement, like, come on, you got this, or it's all right. Let's just do better next time. It's all right. Here we go. Let's try again. This loving kind of talk, like you talk to your dog. I talk about in the book, talk to yourself like you talk to your dog or cat or young child. And it softens things. It slows things down. It opens you up to, again, just moving more slowly in this moment, doing the best that you can right now.
Love it. What do some of your daily spiritual practices look like?
So I have a lot of practices, but I do a few consistently. And I'm not like a crazy, extreme type of practitioner where I have my moments, but what I can say is that I'm really consistent, and I think that works for me. So every morning I write in my journal for 5-10 minutes. Every morning I meditate. Depends on how much time I have, up to half an hour. And every day I move my body in some capacity, even if it's just a walk. But every day I've got to move my body in rhythm. It's just, it aligns my whole energetic field. Movement helps me. I don't always move to work out. I just move because I've got a body and it wants to move. I often tell people, if you could just move your body in these directions every day, your spine is going to be really healthy and happy. So you want to go backward, forward, bend to the side and to the side, and twist, twist. So backward, forward, side, side, twist, twist. Even if you just do that for a few moments, a few minutes, you'll feel better.
Absolutely. When you figure too with our sedentary culture, and even what we call the active sedentary, where people are going to gyms for an hour, maybe even 3+ times a week, but the majority of their time they're sitting at a desk, they're sitting on the couch, they're laying in bed. So even though they have those moments of getting their heart rate up, it's still not the way we were designed in nature to be moving regularly. And you pointed it really well too, the consistency piece of like, hey, just when you got a moment, twist, move from side to side, like get your body active. And it has such amazing effects, not only physically for the body, but emotionally and mentally as well, to ground us down into that present moment. And like we've been talking about, so much slowing things down, paying attention. I think that's where the movement practices, and particularly with yoga, can be so helpful, is just, hey, we don't need to always set aside an hour or two for practice, but just throughout the day, taking those moments to move your spine or to move through just a basic set of movements is so helpful for everybody. I think that's great. Now, let's take a hypothetical for a moment. Let's say you're walking down the street and you see somebody with their head down and they're clearly not thriving in life, and they kind of turn to you and they ask for some type of advice. Now, you've only got this minute or so chatting with them along your walk to distill the bulk of your message that you offer to the world. What would you share with this person?
Wow, 1 minute, that's tough.
Well, it could be a few minutes. We'll give it even a few minutes will be tough. But someone comes across your way, and you've just got that moment to share with them, something to get them on the path. I mean, obviously, we can't transmit any type of a big message, but sometimes those big, complicated messages aren't even what people need. It's that little bit of inspiration, that little bit of push. How can you really draw your message into a container that could allow someone in that space to really begin to thrive more?
That's great. Well, firstly, I definitely would do a few breaths with them, and because so much happens experientially, that goes beyond words. There's so much that's indescribable. So that's why I love teaching yoga so much, because it does get people moving. But to answer your question, so I'd probably do a few breaths with them, just so we can both settle and steady and stabilize. Because once we've settled down, and I would tell them, once you're able to settle your mind down and your nervous system down a bit, the world opens up. All of a sudden, you're able to see more clearly. You start to hear the wisdom arise from within. The direction, the information comes up through us, every single one of us. And when we can start to trust ourselves and trust the messages that we're hearing from within, we will start to move and speak in a way that we have never done before, perhaps. So it's about settling, stabilizing, and then listening and trusting yourself, because there's no better version of you waiting out there. Who you are at its best arrives right now in this moment. And so we have to continue to experience that in order to really trust it. Otherwise, it's just someone giving you some advice.
Beautiful. Well, Cara, I really appreciate the work that you're doing in the world. I enjoyed reading your book. Where can people find out more about you? I know you've got carabradley.net, and for our listeners, making sure that they're going .net, I'm assuming not .com. Where can we find out about you? What's the best way for people to get your book? Where we can find out more about the things that you're offering?
Yeah. So my website's chock full of stuff. I've got loads and loads of stuff on there. I also have a free app. I developed an app to go along with my book. It's called On the Verge, and it's on the App Store right now, coming soon for Android. And it has primer practices, audio, guided practices, video. I have some yoga on there and some moving meditation. It's a great app that really can help you keep this book and this information alive, so that it actually, you start to gain some ground. So on the app On the Verge is the app, and then my website's got lots, carabradley.net, and I'm all over social media, YouTube channel, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. So come and join me, follow me. I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Love it. So read the book, do the actual practices in the book, and then the app's there to help support people along that journey as well. So that's awesome. I like that. Again, thank you so much, Cara, for being on the show today. Really appreciate you sharing your wisdom. I hope people go out and find out more about you, read your book, check out all the things you're doing out there in the world, because you obviously have a lot to share. To all our listeners out there, thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you've learned a lot as well. Many thanks to Cara. I hope you all have a very present moment. And Cara, thank you again.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the show today. Please go over to iTunes, write a review, let us know what you think. It helps us in creating new content for all of you. It also helps new listeners get a sense of what to expect from the show. We really appreciate your feedback. Thanks again for listening. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.